Thank you everybody for coming. Good evening. Hi, I'm Mike Topo. I'm the chairman of the Atlanta Press Club. I'm also with CNN here in Atlanta. We appreciate all of you joining us here for our 6th annual Hall of Fame dinner. As many of you know, the Atlanta Press Club is the second largest press club in the U.S., only behind the National Press Club in D.C. We offer unique opportunities for journalists, such as tonight's event. We do things for the community. We have newsmaker events. And what we want to do is bring together the city and have the conversation about what everybody's concerned about. I want to personally thank you all for coming. You're here because you care about journalism and you care about journalists. And if there's ever a time when we need journalism, it's right now. I would now like to introduce our MC for the evening. Karen Greer is a familiar face and name to everybody in the room. She's an award-winning reporter and anchor, spent over 25 years as a broadcast journalist. She's currently an investigative reporter at CBS 46. Everyone, please, a warm welcome for Karen Greer.
Good evening, thank you so much. And I just will add, former president of the Atlanta Press Club many, many moons ago. Thanks to Ms. Maria Saporta. Where are you, Maria? There she is. She'll rope us into anything for service. We're so proud of her. It is truly an honor in seeing this event tonight and being here with so many fabulous, wonderful people. The Atlanta Press Club Hall of Fame recognizes journalists whose impact on Atlanta and the country will definitely be felt forever. Now, placed in your event programs, I'd be surprised if we weren't inducting some very special students who are also here with us this evening. So we're going to make sure that we let you know who they are. Want to let you know about our sponsors for this evening: Georgia EMC, Hartsville-Jackson, Atlanta International Airport, J.P. Fuqua Foundation, the Robert Woodruff Library, and the Russell family, tonight's bronze sponsors. Let's give them a big round of applause. A special thank you to the Southern Company and George Powell for sponsoring the VIP reception. Round of applause for them. Our silver sponsors include the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Emory University, and the Stuart A. Rose Manuscript Archives and Rare Book Library. And tonight's gold level sponsors, the Home Depot and Wells Fargo. And finally, we give a special thank you.
Good evening. I'm Kelly Cottle of Georgia Humanities, presenting sponsor of tonight's event. Georgia Humanities is proud to show our support of the Atlanta Press Club and to say thank you for the important work that our journalists do. We absolutely need you and rely on you. Our lives and our freedom depend on you. Thank you. Georgia Humanities, an affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, is a statewide organization that preserves and shares the stories and cultural legacies of people and place, past, present, and future. We partner with libraries, schools, colleges and universities, museums, cultural organizations, and community building entities to provide programs like National History Day. We partner with the Smithsonian's Museum on Main Street program to bring traveling exhibitions to smaller communities around our state. We partner with the University System of Georgia and Galileo, the University of Georgia Press, and the Office of the Governor to provide the New Georgia Encyclopedia, an online authoritative resource free to journalists and other curious people everywhere. That's georgiaencyclopedia.org, by the way. The humanities explore how people understand and express the human experience and include literature, history, art, music, language, ethics, philosophy, and much more. At Georgia Humanities, we say that we are dedicated to sharing the stories that move us and make us as Georgians and as people. I think you'll agree the connection to the practice of journalism and history is obvious. In fact, we dabble in journalist circles as often as they will let us, and since 2013, we have had a recurring column called Jamil's Georgia in the Supporter Report, edited by Maria Saporta, of course. And the author of that column is the president of Georgia Humanities, Jamil Zanaldine, who was seated right here at the front table. I would also like to acknowledge and thank my other Georgia Humanities colleagues, and especially our board member Brian Broderick, a principal at Jackson Spalding, who joins us tonight, seated up here. As you are all no doubt aware, 2016 marks the centennial of the Pulitzer Prizes. In honor of this anniversary, the Pulitzer Prize Centennial Campfires Initiative, which is a joint venture with the Federation of State Humanities Councils, offered funding for projects seeking to focus on journalism and the humanities, to imagine their future and to inspire new generations to consider the values represented by Pulitzer Prize-winning work. With some of this funding, a team from UGA's Grady College of Journalism started their own campfire by building a website called Look Forward, a digital exhibition on civil rights and the Pulitzer Prize in Georgia. The URL is lookforwardga.org, which is available to you tonight, right now, as a sneak preview. With more than 100 unique digital artifacts, the site features 15 Georgia Pulitzer-winning journalists, authors, and historians. All of their work has contributed to the cause for civil rights. Historical context on the Pulitzer Prize and the civil rights movement is also featured. Correlated links to the New Georgia Encyclopedia abound. The Grady team recorded more than 12 hours of interviews with 20 people, and these interviews will be housed at the Special Collections Library at the University of Georgia, where they will be available to support future research on civil rights in Georgia. I want to acknowledge Dr. Janice Hume and Jason Guthrie of the Grady Journalism School. If you wouldn't mind standing up, they're the ones who put this website together. The power of such a resource is evident, and we know that Georgia's stories are national stories. Dignity, freedom, equality, all find their way into the Pulitzer stories represented here.
And I'm sure many around the world, journalists around the world, have a soft spot, a hard, just a difficult time to stomach the news that we got about 2 weeks ago. We lost great Gwen Ifill. I know many of you are thinking about her tonight as we prepare to celebrate great journalism and induct her longtime co-host Judy Woodruff into the Hall of Fame. So let's have a moment of silence for Gwen and for the many great journalists we lost.
In 1994, Waga's parent company dropped a bombshell on everyone at the station by dropping CBS and its global news gathering operation and replacing it with Fox. Fox, back then, had The Simpsons. There was no Fox News Channel, not yet.
It's 6 a.m. and this is Good Day Atlanta.
McEntee saw it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for his journalists. He took control of Channel 5's new, valuable airtime.
From 4:30 to 10 a.m. on Fox 5.
And ultimately, McEntee was able to triple his local newscast to nearly 60 hours a week, more than any other station in the market. And viewers stayed with Waga.
There's still a great thirst for local news.
That's McEntee speaking at an Atlanta Press Club forum in 2009, insisting that the challenge wasn't to fill the extra quantity of airtime, but to fill it with consistent quality. His pride and joy?
It's only 5 words. 5 words. 5 words that strike fear and corrupt politicians.
The nationally renowned I-Team.
5 words that make the difference between ripoffs and reform.
I mean, the average lifespan for a news director is somewhere between 2 years and 2.5 years. So 20 years is way beyond beating the odds. It's sort of like living to 150 years. You just don't do it. So it says a lot to him about Bud and his quality.
Monday 11 on CBS 46. Fox 5 News at 6.
And Pimentel points out that to this day, you can still see Bud McEntee, the McEntee legacy, on every newscast.
He built really the foundation of what they are today in terms of news product. Whoever has come behind him has built on that, but without the foundation that Bud had laid, they wouldn't be where they are today.
Bud McEntee, inducted into the 2016 Atlanta Press Club Hall of Fame.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Fox 5 Representative Taylor and 2013 Hall of Fame inductee, Dave.
It is really an exciting moment to me to be in this room with so many journalists whose work that I observe and enjoy, both my coworkers and competitors. And in this time and era that we're talking about where we're all under so much duress for what we do, it's great to see this room full of people that just get up and go to work every day and try to get it right. And the guy who led us on that trek at Fox 5 and Wagon before that was my man Bud. And if I can borrow from Shakespeare, Bud, we're here to praise you, not to bury you. There's so much I can say about this man because I worked in every second of his 19 years as a news director at Wagon. But I'm not going to go on and on and on because Bud will go on and on and on once he gets up here. But I want to tell you that my basic nature is to research a topic, even though it's one I well know. So I sent out an email missive to all my Fox 5 friends to ask sum Bud up for me in one word. If you need a couple of words, if you could. And this is what I got back. Passionate, competitive, fierce, loyal, competitive, caring, and I'll explain that later. Competitive, did I say competitive? Lucky, and this was in total deference to the fact that he's married to one of God's greatest women on this planet, Nanette, and his two wonderful children who are here tonight, David and Anna. Old school, always had your back, would fight the suits for you. And as Randy Travis says, a dedicated, determined, and dependable stick of dynamite. And my favorite, an angry, red-faced Irishman. Bud came into the newsroom every day, very simply, with one mantra: win. We're going to win. We're going to tell better stories. We're going to tell more stories. We're going to break stories that nobody else has, and we're going to do them in a way that nobody else is going to do. The word that I heard from one of the co-workers, Ms. Kisak, who said caring, and she said, Bud cared about the news and he cared about the people. And if I've heard it once, I've heard it 100 times at a retirement when somebody was leaving us, when somebody unfortunately had passed away in the family, that Bud would get up in front of everyone with Channel 5 and tell them that I know that they have a 5 right here implanted on their heart. And that's how he felt. As hard as he pushed us, he loved us just as much. And that's why I love this man, Bud McAnany.
Try to get through this without being emotional about McAnty, but as he said, I'm an Irish Catholic, so thanks, Dale, for that wonderful introduction. I'd also like to thank members of the Atlanta Press Club for hosting tonight and this great honor. In particular, having a great conversation with Tom Johnson, and he and I got hoodwinked into the Atlanta Press Club by the same two women. And they're both here tonight, so I get to call them out. My former friends, Maria Saporta and Karen Greer. Both of whom in 1995 came to me and said, we'd like to be on the press club board. I said, sure, fine, that's great. About a day later, we'd like to become president of the Atlanta Press Club. I remember going back to a fellow who was my boss at the time, and I said, Jack, they want me to become the president of the Atlanta Press Club. He said, good, you can do that on your own time. I said, whoa, they're going to help me out. Well, thank God they did. And it was one of the greatest experiences that I ever had. Because I got to meet journalists from print, radio, and television who came through this town and did a fantastic job, and to this day do a fantastic job. And, sidebar, like Tom, I got to know some of the fine folks at the time at CNN, including my close friend, Jack Volbeck. You know, growing up in Queens, New York, I never imagined that I would not only call Atlanta home, but how much I would grow to love it here. I fell in love with the South when I met the love of my life, Nanette. And we met in Nashville, Tennessee. I was actually hired at WKRN by this gorgeous woman, who would become my wife, my best friend, and mother, David and Anna. Nanette was the director of human resources at WKRN, which is then was WNGE, and I remember receiving the acceptance letter from the TV station by somebody named Nanette. Little did I know, that letter would turn out to be the love letter of a lifetime. You are my heart. Well, we left Nashville, and we were bound for St. Louis. And something funny happened on the way to St. Louis. I was going to go work for KMOV, back then KMOX, a CBS owned and operated station. And I was going to be the 5 o'clock producer. So we were all ready to go, when I got a phone call from the very man who recommended me for the job in St. Louis, and he said, "I need you here in Atlanta." My wife, being from Birmingham, was very pro-Atlanta. Nothing disparaging about St. Louis. Great baseball town. In any case, we ended up here in Atlanta. Funny sidebar, after I had called the executive producer in St. Louis to tell her I was not coming, I didn't know that this was the woman's first hire ever. And I'll never forget, dead silence on the phone, and I had been told by the person who arranged this switch that everything was fine. Everybody at CBS knew, except her. So there I am on the phone, and apologizing, saying it would have been really nice to work in St. Louis, and I'm sorry. And she said, "Bud McEntee, I'm going to tell you something right now. You will never work for CBS News. As a matter of fact, everyone's going to know this, including Mr. Cronkite." Now, I was 26 years old. I'm happy to say, sidebar, that I met Walter Cronkite at the same time I met Judy Woodruff years ago at an RTMDA. Judy was gracious, as always, and so was Mr. Cronkite. He never mentioned a thing about it. I started as the 11 o'clock producer. I wrapped up a fantastic career at WAGA 30 years later. From the very first day, I was surrounded by some of the best journalists and teachers in the country. I am so thankful to the many outstanding journalists, and I use that word with a capital J. They taught me the right, fair, and balanced way to tell stories objectively, without slant or bias. I've always said that WAGA, Channel 5, TV 5, Eyewitness News, 5 News Scene, whatever you call it, we were fair and balanced before fair and balanced was cool. During my 30 years at WAGA, as we saw in the terrific video, and I'm so appreciative of that, I lived through a lot of changes. I used to say I was the news director at 3 television stations in one. A strong CBS affiliate, a strong Fox affiliate, and a strong Fox-owned and operated station. At the time, General Manager Jack Sander took a crazy leap and promoted me to be news director. And as I say, we were among the elite CBS affiliates. And then, just as I was feeling comfortable, bam, as my daughter would say, we switched from CBS to Fox. We were a bit nervous. Our competitors were dancing down Peachtree. The death of WAGA. We were WAGA. CBS or Fox, it didn't matter. In fact, that switch was probably one of the best things that happened. We grew in ratings, revenue, number of locally produced newscasts. That growth continued when we became a Fox-owned and operated station. One of the people greatly responsible for that growth is with us tonight, my former GM and friend, Gene McHugh. Gene and I have often said we worked with some of the best in what we call a golden time in local television. I'm very proud of what we as a team accomplished, including the creation of Good Day Atlanta, which now is probably, what, All Day Atlanta? Fox 5 News at 10, Fox 5 News Edge at 11. And not just because Dale Russell introduced me. I am particularly proud of WAGA's commitment to investigative reporting. And as Dale alluded, it was suggested when I first became news director that we follow a cost-cutting pattern taken by many local newsrooms, scale back or eliminate investigative reporting. Needless to say, we took a different path. I believe then, as I do now, that investigative reporting, especially at the local level, is critical to the success and growth of journalism, whether on local broadcasts, websites, or social media. Investigative is the lifeblood of what we do, and true investigative is more relevant than ever before. I thank those who supported what was called by some my crazy decision to not just maintain the I-Team, but rather develop and expand our investigative efforts, so as to provide true and unique, life-changing reporting that affects all of us. To that end, and forgive me if I miss somebody, I salute Dale, Michael, Randy Travis and Travis Shields, and Mindy Larkin, and all who were part of the I-Team and who are part of the I-Team now. And I salute all investigative reporters, including my friend Richard Belgian and Karen Greer, from all around the country, for your commitment to digging into issues that affect the lives of so many, and by telling stories that truly matter. Remember, news consumers can get the basic news of the day from a variety of sources in 2016. They've already checked their cell phones and Facebook before they turn on the local morning news. But what they can't get is your uniquely produced local investigative stories, stories that set you apart. I am proud of the team that I helped build and the work family that I've been fortunate enough to call friends over the last 3 decades. Together, we have witnessed so many changes in this news business, but I think the fundamentals of the game are still the same. Now more than ever, in our nation, as journalists, and therefore the historians of our time, it is so important for a free press. As journalists, we have the opportunity, moreover, the obligation to ask meaningful questions of decision makers. And I encourage all to explore the how and the why. How did it happen? And why did it happen? What do we learn from it? What matters is that we produce to the best of our abilities. We commit to great storytelling with unique content. We need to be tough and relentless in our search for truth. People rely upon us to dig deeper and ask the questions they wish they could ask. I guess my stories have been around a little bit, Dale. You're right. When I served as the news director at WAGA, inevitably, somebody would come into my office, interrupt my 7th Diet Coke of the day, tell me they were heading off to a new opportunity. And I would always remind them of what a special place WAGA was, and I hope WAGA will be forever. I would tell them as a result of that experience, he or she would forever have that little 5 heart in their heart. And that goes double for me. I'll always have that little 5 carved in my heart. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for this great honor. I appreciate it.
Our next inductee this evening also worked at WAGA early in her career, but made her mark as one of the most respected journalists at NBC, CNN, and PBS. Let's look at the video screens. Miss Judy Woodruff.
Tonight, Americans decide. Voters head to the polls. Election night 2016. The results of the roughest presidential campaign in modern U.S. history are unfolding before our eyes. On PBS, managing editor and anchor Judy Woodruff, this veteran journalist, the nation's senior network news main anchor, is reporting it all.
It's taking longer to count some of these days.
For more than 9 hours, non-stop, live, Woodruff guides the viewers and the analysts surrounding her, minute by minute, through surprise after surprise, as the votes come in, state by state.
I thought it wouldn't be this tight, but I mean, can you imagine him getting to 270, to Trump getting to 270?
The political experts on the panel reflect the nation's blue and red amazement. But Woodruff, the anchor, the rock, simply calmly reports.
We have another presidential call to make.
With her powerful command of the facts inside the whirlwinds.
Several states are too close to call.
Is Donald Trump going to lose? Well, Donald Trump is on his way to...
It is 2:30 in the morning when Woodruff interrupts herself mid-sentence. She has blockbuster news, and without embellishment or fanfare.
Associated Press is calling Wisconsin, so that puts him over the top. Donald Trump is the next president of the United States.
And that's... So what was it that prepared her for this? There was high school in Augusta, Georgia, then Duke, poli-sci major, class of '68.
And here is the next president of the United States, Donald Trump.
What transformed her into the political journalist that we've always known her to be?
I'm Judy Woodruff. I'm 38 years old, and I've been a reporter for WAGA-TV in Atlanta for the past 5 years.
Experience and skill, born of youthful self-confidence and talent and drive. Learning her political beats inside out, developing sources, the rough and tough basics. Woodruff's first big break took her to Georgia State Capitol. She was a couple of years out of college when WAGA-TV in Atlanta hired her to cover the Georgia legislature and Governor Jimmy Carter.
Last night's victory came after months of campaigning.
After 5 years, NBC News called. She was prepared, ready for the challenge.
When Carter first visited Iowa 1 year ago,
she covered Carter's campaign for president. Woodruff had recently applied at all the networks. All turned her down, until an unexpected opening at NBC's Atlanta bureau gave her her chance in the field, and her work was spectacular.
Judy Woodruff, NBC News, the White House.
By 1977, after just 2 years, Judy Woodruff was White House correspondent for NBC News. She commanded the beat during Carter's term,
some Reagan advisors say privately,
and into Reagan's, one of only a few women journalists in what was in Washington then a mostly man's club.
This News Frontline.
But it was Woodruff's passion for long-form reporting that would define her career. First at PBS, then at CNN, and later, again and now at PBS.
Good evening, I'm Gwen Eichel.
And I'm Judy Woodruff.
On the NewsHour tonight, Republican candidate.
And in 2013, Judy Woodruff and Gwen Eichel became managing editors and co-anchors of the weeknight PBS NewsHour.
On the NewsHour.
Viewers couldn't help but take note at the time. A full half-century after Huntley Brinkley, Woodruff and Eichel were the first female network news co-anchors. Throughout her career, Woodruff has shattered the limits of broadcast journalism, illuminating complex issues and crises and events and politics in the U.S. and abroad. A light in the darkness, always digging for facts. And Judy Woodruff and her husband, journalist Al Hunt, have helped raise tens of millions of dollars for spina bifida research and care. The first of their 3 children, Jeffrey, was born with spina bifida. They have devoted their lives to supporting fellow spina bifida families. The success of this journalist's career, begun 46 years ago in Atlanta, is measured not just by the big story she has broken, or even by the unqualified trust she has earned, but by the impact she has on the lives of countless others who are grateful for her and her work. Judy Woodruff, 2016 inductee, Atlanta Press Club Hall of Fame.
It is my honor and privilege to welcome former First Lady Rosalynn Carter to the podium.
Well, I'm honored to be here tonight, to have the opportunity to introduce one of the most respected and beloved journalists of our time, our next honoree, Judy Woodruff. I have known Judy for a very long time, since 1970, just as she arrived. When she was a very young reporter in Atlanta covering Jimmy's campaign for governor. I didn't know Judy was around. I knew she was around, but I didn't see her very often because I was off campaigning on my own. Driving from one town to another, passing out brochures, looking for the press, newspapers, not much TV back then, radio stations. I remember turning down a driveway, riding toward an antenna the first day I went campaigning in Florida to see if I could do that in another state. And we found this radio station with one person playing music. And I told him that my husband was running for governor and I wanted him to interview me. And he said, what in the world am I going to ask you? And I said, well, I have a list of questions. And so the first day was over. We saw a lot of radio stations. We went looking for antennas after that. And ended up at 5 stations on occasion. That's too much about me. I'm going to talk about Judy. I best remember Judy from those early days when she covered Jimmy's inauguration as governor. A few years back, a TV station in Atlanta, well, it was actually a good while ago, and a TV station had moved out. And when they moved a large piece of furniture, they found a video of Jimmy's inauguration. We were sitting on the platform, and there was Judy standing down, doing her job. And I thought that day, she is really beautiful, and she got this long hair that turns up at the end. You see. 5 years later, it was Judy who convinced her bosses at the network that they should pay some attention to this man from Georgia who said he was running for president. And she did the first profile on Jimmy that aired on NBC. Well, as you probably know, or as you do know, Judy's instinct about Jimmy's potential was right on target. And as a reward, she got to live in a motel in Americus, Georgia for 3 months, covering our transition to Washington. Journalism is such a glamorous business. NBC made Judy chief White House correspondent during her years there. She covered my trip to Latin America soon after Jimmy became president. And you can imagine how good it was to look up at the press, had a cadre of press myself by then, and see Judy's face among that sea of male faces. Judy was one of those hardy reporters who filed stories from the cozy inn in Thurmont, Maryland, during the ups and downs of the long Camp David summit in 1978. She stuck with it through all those 13 days and was at the White House when Prime Minister Reagan and President Sadat signed the peace accord. I'll never forget that day. Mrs. Begin and I had been at Camp David, and we went into town because there was a concert at the White House that we had planned before we knew we were going to be at Camp David for 13 days. And we were standing at the top of the steps outside the Blue Room when the elevator with the men coming back from Camp David landed in a helicopter on the lawn at the White House, South Lawn. And Prime Minister Begin got to Mrs. Begin before Jimmy got to me, and he said, "Mama, we're going to go down in history for this." Did you hear that, Judy? I wondered if you heard that. Jimmy and I take credit for Judy's long and successful marriage. Congratulations, Judy, on your induction into the Atlanta Press Club Hall of Fame.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Carter. I am so honored that you were here tonight and so appreciative of what you said. You know, the truth is, if we had followed Rosalind Carter during that campaign back in 1970, we would have known a whole lot more about what was going on than following her husband. And she's absolutely right about the motel on Americus. But Mrs. Carter, given the schedule that you and President Carter keep, what is it, 20 countries every 2 weeks? Something like that, I am just especially grateful that you made time to be here. I have to say again, for the extraordinary contributions that Mrs. Carter and President Carter have made, for the work they continue to do from one overlooked part of the world to another, to improve the lives of people who are least able to do for themselves, for the work that you have done, especially in the field of mental health, for the difference that you've made. I want to ask everyone to please give Mrs. Carter a round. She stole my story about the baseball, the softball diamond. It was where Al and I met. He was with the Wall Street Journal, and they had sent him down to cover then Governor Carter. I was covering him for NBC. And one thing I want to point out is that it was the press corps against what was supposed to be the Carter staff. But you never saw people like Jerry Rapshoon, who's here tonight. Where are you, Jerry? Or Hamilton, the late beloved Hamilton Jordan or Jody Powell. You saw the Secret Service agents. So the press, we never had a chance. And I just want to start out by thanking and honoring tonight's other honorees. Bud McEntee so admirably ran coverage. I loved hearing those stories about what you did to lead that great news organization as long as you did. And it, as somebody mentioned, it was where a few years earlier I worked covering Governor Carter. But congratulations on your impressive body of work. I'm honored not only because this is what you get when you've been doing something for so long, they don't know what else to recognize you for, but also because this truly is the city where I cut my teeth as a reporter, where I learned what journalism can and should be. It was here that I learned to watch carefully how Bill Shipp of the Atlanta Constitution, another Hall of Famer, did his job, asking politicians tough but fair questions. Where I observed the late, beloved Ray Moore, television newsman, mentor to me, insisting that a reporter's work is never done, that you not only had to have 2 sources for every piece of original reporting, but the journalists play a critical role in the civic life of a city, of a state, and of a nation. And Bob Brennan, another mentor, who hired me for my first job as a reporter at WAGA and kept me humble, reminding me to take nothing at face value and that there's almost no story that can't be written better and shorter. Of course, it is also the city where my first boss, the news director at then WQXI-TV, told me, after he'd given me a job as the newsroom secretary right out of college, he said, besides, how could I not hire somebody with legs like yours? And who was succeeded by, you'll notice I'm not naming any of these individuals, who was succeeded by a news director who, whenever I mentioned that I wanted to learn more about reporting, I wanted to follow reporters around to understand how they did their job, he responded, but Judy, we already have a woman reporter. But I eventually did get a break, and I learned so much in my time here, even without the access that I really wanted, Mrs. Carter, in the administration of your husband, Governor Carter. Enough that when, 40 years ago, NBC News asked me to join their White House team covering the incoming Carter administration, I had enough confidence to say yes, but enough humility to know that I still had so much more to learn. And that brings me to one more mentor who is here tonight, the human dynamo and fellow Hall of Famer, named Tom Johnson, who's sitting right there. Who persuaded me to go to work for CNN, where under his leadership and the leadership of Ted Turner, I was given an incredible opportunity to be part of an international news gathering organization, a place that broadened my horizons and became the place where I learned so much that I never could have learned in the circumstances where I was. And along the way, Tom and I became very dear friends, but he and his wife had went, and I'm so thrilled that both of you are here tonight. But I'm so thankful over the years for having that front row seat, we like to say that journalists have, a chance to cover the peace talks at Camp David, the aftermath of terrible events like the 9/11 attacks, the financial collapse in 2008, to report on 11 presidential elections over the years, because all of this has given me a window into humanity and a chance to deepen my understanding of the best and the worst of our world. In that spirit, I want to dedicate my participation this evening to my dear friend, colleague, and NewsHour co-anchor Gwen Eiffel, whom, as you know, we lost 2 weeks ago. She's left a big hole in my heart and in the hearts of so many others. I called her a supernova. The tributes to her have poured in from literally everywhere. Gwen and I were the first women co-anchors of a national newscast. We sat beside each other every night, along with political conventions you saw at debates and election nights. I said at her funeral that we didn't look like other anchor teams, and we love that. We grew so close, we joked that we were like an old married couple. At first, we would email each and every night to make sure we weren't going to be wearing the same color on the air the next day. We couldn't be the Bobbsey twins. But at some point, we began to intuit what the other person was thinking, so no more emails titled "Wearing Red." We would just show up, and somehow our jackets never clashed. Gwen broke through barriers in her moves from newspapers to television and eventually to PBS. I faced barriers as a woman. Gwen faced higher barriers as a woman and a person of color. She will always be an inspiration to those who question whether there's a place for them in the highest ranks of our craft. That, and what Gwen loved about journalism and believed that it could be, is her enduring legacy. She, like most of us, went into journalism, as she once said, because she always thought there'd be new and exciting discoveries just around the corner. She gravitated to covering politics because she loved this country, and she cared about where it's headed, and because she was good at asking those tough questions. But they weren't tough for the sake of being tough. She said in a commencement address at Wake Forest University just 3 years ago that her years spent covering politics had made her skeptical, but not cynical. You see, cynics think they know the answers already, and then they stop listening, she said. Skeptics always have more questions to ask, but we are willing to be persuaded to the honesty of an alternate point of view. We have never needed journalists like Gwen Ifill more than we do today. Reporters who are firm but fair, who hate making mistakes, but admit it when they do, who hold public officials accountable, who understand how much is at stake as leaders make decisions that affect the world that we live in today, and the world that our children and our grandchildren will inherit, who live by the creed without fear or favor.
Helping tell the world so long ago, when they were all so young, about their brand new Atlanta student movement.
When the students couldn't get their message out to the mainstream media, including African American publications, the students got together and formed their own newspaper, and John Smith was there at the beginning.
It was in 1960 when students from the campuses of Atlanta University Center, including Morehouse and Clark and Morris Brown and Spelman, began nonviolent demonstrations in downtown Atlanta, risking their lives, challenging Jim Crow laws and customs. They simply sat peacefully at whites-only public lunch counters, wanting to order coffee and food. And they tried to patronize other white-owned businesses, and police arrested them. But few people were aware of any of that. There was little, if any, news coverage. Not even from the Atlanta Daily World, run by Alexis Scott's family.
My great uncle, who was publisher at the time, was more of a contemporary of Daddy King and some of the old guard in Atlanta civil rights. And they did not really appreciate the street movement, the direct confrontation movement. They were more in tune with going through the court system.
So, in August 1960, they start their own newspaper. The founders are leaders of the Atlanta student movement, including Julian Bond and Lonnie King, along with supporters like Herman Russell and Jesse Hill. And they call their new newspaper the Atlanta Inquirer. And within months, they bring on Morehouse grad, Army veteran, and Atlanta public school math teacher, John B. Smith, to be editor. He worked to build up what he called the nation's black press in cities across the U.S., helping lead the National Newspaper Publishers Association, all while publishing the Inquirer, now with his son, non-stop since that first issue in 1960, still tackling issues roiling the nation.
Current issues like police brutality, city government issues, everything that impacts the black community is part of the Atlanta Inquirer's table of stories.
Thank you and good evening. It is really a pleasure for me to be here today. It is great from the perspective of being an elected official to be here with so much press and not be the point of interest for that press. That's a joke, you can laugh. But I really do feel privileged to be here tonight to bring to the stage Mr. John B. Smith Sr. I remarked to Michael Russell as we were making our way into the room here this evening. He said he doesn't remember a time not knowing John B. Smith. I said, I share that same experience. The Inquirer was started before I was born. And he and my father, Elijah Smith, and Carl Holman, and dozens of others that were there at the beginning and the founding of that great paper and institution began it at a time when it was dangerous to do so, when it was unheard of for young people, young entrepreneurs to do so here in the city prior to Atlanta being the city so-called too busy to hate. You know, it was 1960. Atlanta was a segregated place. It was a better southern city than most, and in the atmosphere of the southeastern United States. There's a famous story that remarks that in 1960, all of Eisenhower highway system signs, when you're moving your way south, pointed toward Birmingham. Today, they now point towards Atlanta. Majority community, I mean the silent majority in the African American community, who was not sold on their movement. As was alluded to in the film by Alexis, the old guard, or what became known as the old guard, they believed in a slow progression of negotiation and lawsuits. They didn't believe in direct action. They felt that it was dangerous for activists in Atlanta to engage in that kind of activity. One, because most of the folks in Atlanta who were African American worked for the white establishment in some way, shape, or form, whether it was in individual homes or in businesses. And they felt if they became active in that direct fashion way, they would lose their jobs. It'd have a negative impact, and it would blow back at them in a very negative way. So they were very suspicious of those types of activities. So it became imperative to get the word out and to continue to educate that silent majority in the African American community about the earnest efforts of the students. And out of that outgrowth, M. Call Coleman, our honoree tonight, they established the Atlanta Inquirer. Telling the stories that other folks might be squeamish about, telling the stories that we don't want to embarrass our friends about, standing up for right regardless of where the story leads or where the information goes, following the facts to bring that light out of Olympus down to the people like a great Prometheus. This is John B. Smith Sr. Ladies and gentlemen,
to seek out the truth and report it where I feel safe.
That's it.
To my colleagues in the Atlanta University system, I thank you for allowing me to go on this journey with you. I'd like to thank my family at this time. My son and my daughter, who are here with me, and my daughter who is my oldest child, passed the name. Another very special person I'd like to thank by the name of Sally J. Warner. You talking about a friend? That's a real friend. To Herman J. Russell, the late Herman J. Russell. To the late Jesse Hill Jr. And others who mentored me and gave me the guidance I need to be part of the person I am today. I thank them as well. And I thank so many of you who I can call friends, if not before tonight, and heretofore. There's a poem that I learned in the 9th grade. As a boy, he never dreamed he would meet one president or two presidents or three. They said, I am on a piece of work. After I leave your hand, you may never see me again. Therefore, put into me your best, so that I may stand for men that need not be ashamed. Though I may have hurt some of your feelings, know this, I did it out of truth and love. Paula, thank you for the phone call to let me know this day was coming. Thank you, Jane. A true, magnificent spirit of the Lord. Lori, thank you. and Maria, my friends. I love you very much, and I will always be appreciative of this evening and this night. That as I go on this journey, I would know the many angels that join me along the trail. But I will let you to always hold this in your heart. Always. Be understanding of the young. Compassionate toward those who are less fortunate than we. If I had but 10,000 words, they would not express to you my gratitude for this evening. But I say to all of you, 10,000 times, thank you, thank you, thank you. We love you.
Now, our final induction tonight goes to someone who also was a strong voice during the Civil Rights Movement. Our final induction for this evening goes to the late Eugene Patterson.
Somewhere along the way, sometime early during his 41 years in journalism, Eugene Patterson awakened to the power of the centuries that was inside him.
Because you're telling the Southern white that what his daddy and his granddaddy believed was wrong, and that's hard to accept.
The power that would pour out of him. The power of the printed word to transform, so that even here, in this now tranquil park in Birmingham, a half-century removed from a hell on earth, a transforming world can embrace Patterson's hope of children at play with doves. Where dogs of war once rolled, even here.
Now, 1963 was a year full of violence in the South, racial violence. Birmingham in April and May of 1963. Bullcon brought the dogs and the hoses out against demonstrators at Kelly Ingle Park in Birmingham.
Journalist and historian Hank Klivenoff, standing at the Northwest Atlanta home where Eugene Patterson and his family lived in 1963. Speaks of how Patterson, by then, had already been the editor of the Atlanta Constitution for 3 years, succeeding the giant Ralph McGill. And Patterson followed McGill's practice of writing a column a day, 7 days a week.
So in September of 1963, specifically on a Sunday, September 15th, Gene was out here mowing this lawn. And his wife comes and says, "Gene, you've got a call from the office. It sounds pretty urgent."
And that is how Patterson learned. On that Sunday morning, someone detonated a bomb in a church in Birmingham's 16th Street Baptist Church. The explosion killed 4 children, 4 girls. 3 of the girls were 14, 1 was 11. Patterson immediately drove to the Constitution's downtown Atlanta newsroom and went to work.
And he does some reporting, he makes some calls, and he writes what would be his signature column of all time, A Flower for the Graves. And it's the most poignant, moving, powerful piece of his career.
A Negro mother wept in the street Sunday morning in front of a Baptist church in Birmingham. In her hand, she held a shoe, 1 shoe from the foot of her dead child. We hold that shoe with her. Every one of us in the white South holds that small shoe. The power of 557 words. Eugene Patterson's elegant and scorching words excoriated the white South for refusing to condemn and combat racial terrorism. He charged and convicted the white South of silent complicity in the murders. We broke those children's children's bodies, he wrote, "If our South is ever to be what we wish it to be, we will plant a flower of nobler resolve for the South now upon these 4 small graves that we dug."
But it just riveted the
Thank you very much. And I want to thank the press club for giving me this high honor tonight, because to be chosen to introduce a man for whom I had great love and respect pleases me greatly. And by the way, audience, don't you think Atlanta has the best press corps in the United States? Eugene Patterson, one of the most distinguished journalists of the 20th century. He was a war hero, and he had editorial assignments in many of the country's leading newspapers: the Washington Post, St. Petersburg Times, and jointly at the Atlanta Journal and Constitution. And he worked for the United Press. And he's a man of great conviction and courage. And he was so proud to have served on the U.S. Civil Rights Commission as well. Now we know Rodney King coined a slogan, "Can we all get along?" But it was really Eugene Patterson who, through his commitment for equality, established the thought even better. He truly believed that we as blacks and whites could get along in this society. He spoke directly to white Southerners and urged them to accept equality between all races. I had spearheaded a project in Southwest Atlanta encouraging blacks and whites to live together, not have white flight all the time. I called the project SWAP, an acronym for Southwest Atlantans for Progress, where we encouraged the people to swap. Swap houses, swap children, swap churches. Well, Mr. Patterson liked that project and encouraged me greatly and supported me extensively. Black ministers spoke at white churches and white ministers spoke at black churches, and the congregations mixed. One day, a white caller called Mr. Patterson and expressed her anger. She said, "Mr. Patterson, these colored people are just taking everything away from us white people. They took our schools, our neighborhoods, and now our churches. Mr. Patterson, you've got to do something. Please write about that." And he did. She probably didn't like what he wrote, but he wrote it. Mr. Patterson was a man of great wisdom, and I loved spending time with him, but what I didn't enjoy so much is when he would call and invite me to go to lunch. He would say, "We're just going to talk about the problems of the world," and as soon as we get to lunch, he would talk about his military days. And I said, "Mr. Patterson, I didn't go to the Army, so I don't know anything about the military. So could we talk about something we could both talk about?" Well, it didn't take us long to find something to talk about. But a story a lot of people don't know is when Dr. King was killed, there were calls coming in from all over the world. Mr. Patterson called me personally. I was over at Mrs. King's house. And he told me he had gotten a call from Mr. Nixon, who had just won the nomination. He was not yet president, but had expressed that he wanted to visit Mrs. King. But he knew that Dr. King did not support his candidacy and wanted to know if Mr. Patterson knew anybody where he could help him get in to visit Mrs. King. Well, he called me, and I said, well, I don't know whether she will receive him or not, but I will find out. At the house that night were many visitors, and a lot of the people who heard the discussion said, no, don't let him come. He just wants to, show off at this moment, because everybody knew how Dr. King felt about him. When I got into the privacy of her bedroom, I just said, Mrs. King, let him come. This is no time for politics. If he wants to come, why don't we just kind of set some parameters until we can't use an entourage, but he was welcome to visit. I called Mr. Patterson back and told him we had gotten approval for Mrs. King to receive him. And sure enough, Mr. Nixon followed all the things that I had established, and he came in an unmarked car. I think it was I don't want to offend anybody, but it was a Plymouth. And just him and 2 or 3 security people. He sat by her bedside and said, Mrs. King, we know what Dr. King felt about our movement, but we know you have 4 children. And Pat and I are coming out to say that as white Americans, we feel some guilt and some responsibility for what has happened to Dr. King. So I have a check that I'm going to present to you that will cover education for all 4 of your children when they become of age. Very few people know that story. Well, they didn't use the money, but he brought the check anyway.
Thank you for the opportunity to accept this award on our grandfather's behalf. He would be honored to be among the prestigious and accomplished group being inducted tonight. The members of this Hall of Fame represent ethics and integrity in journalism. Our grandfather, in his storied career, used his words to do good in this world. He uncovered corrupt systems, challenged the status quo, and revealed the truth when it was difficult, even dangerous. This was his job as a Southern journalist in the civil rights era. He was faced daily with what was right and what was wrong, and by choosing what was right, he gave us hope. Beyond all this, Gene Patterson was a loyal and faithful friend, a brave soldier, a beloved father to our mother. We called him Granddaddy. His generosity and unconditional love became the cornerstone of our childhood. If you knew Gene Patterson the way we did, you knew that even his thank you notes were worthy of a Pulitzer Prize. You may have shared a newspaper with him in a sunny Florida room, debated football over cocktails, or joined him in boisterously singing Christmas carols around the piano. If you knew Gene Patterson the way we did, you may have received a typewritten note attached to a clipped newspaper article in the mail, spent an afternoon fishing on Tampa Bay, or gotten an enthusiastic tour of the Patterson family farm in Adel, Georgia. If you knew Gene Patterson the way we did, you knew that his passion for journalism was matched only by the love that he had for his family and his friends.
Hall of Fame inductees and producers.
of the Stuart A. Rose Manuscript Archives and Rare Book Library at Emory University, and I'm honored to be here tonight to make a special announcement. I've been inspired by all the stories that I've heard tonight, and it's our job in the Rose Library to collect those stories and connect them to the lives of all of us. I will be joined by Jay Faust, son-in-law of Eugene Patterson, and Roy Peter Clark, Vice President and Senior Scholar of the Poynter Institute in St. Petersburg, Florida. Thanks to them and to the good graces and generosity of the entire Patterson family, which we've just heard so much about, and the Poynter Institute, and the dedicated efforts of my colleagues at Emory University, Hank Klivanoff and Randy Gu, we're delighted to share with you tonight that the papers of Eugene Patterson are now part of the Rose Library and will very soon be accessible to scholars, journalists, activists, historians, students, and curiosity, people who want to engage in these stories and learn more about these amazing lifetime moments. The Eugene Patterson papers are rich in the history that have shaped our city, region, and nation, contained in nearly 90 boxes, covering his influence, which we've heard about as an editor at the Atlanta Constitution, where 50 years ago he was writing the columns that would win the 1967 Pulitzer Prize in editorial writing, the Washington Post, and at the St. Petersburg, now the Tampa Bay Times, where he created a newspaper nationally known for extraordinary writers. Indeed, as chairman of the board, he put the Poynter Institute on the map as the best newspaper training ground in the U.S. The papers we have include the accolades he received for his column, A Flower for the Graves, shown on the card at everyone's place setting, a column that Walter Cronkite insisted Patterson read on CBS Evening News the day after the 1963 Birmingham church bombing. I could go on. After all, there are 90 boxes that came to us. A hallmark of the Rose Library is preserving, stewarding, and making accessible the papers. So in the very near future, you will be able to come and see for yourselves these amazing columns, correspondence, thank you notes, and photographs. I want to thank Jay Fausch and his daughters, Jean's granddaughters, Laura, Emily, and Molly, for entrusting the great legacy of Eugene Patterson to the Rose Library.
Thank you, Rosemary. On behalf of the Patterson family, I'd just like to say how pleased we are that Gene's body of work is coming home to the great state of Georgia, and more specifically to the city of Atlanta, where he did the editorial writing that won him the Pulitzer Prize. And even maybe more specifically to Emory University and the Rose Library, where it joins the papers of many of Gene's contemporaries, including those of his best friend and ally, Ralph McGill. I'd also like to thank Lori Strauss and the Atlanta Press Club for this incredible honor, for the opportunity to be here tonight. And I'd like to thank Rosemary, Hank Klivanoff, and Randy Gray, as well as all the other good folks at Emory for their support and spirited advocacy that helped make this transfer happen. But I'd especially like to thank Roy Peter Clark and David Shedden at the Poynter Institute for the many years of loving care that they gave to forge the Patterson collection into the form that it is today. So thank you.
I found out by talking to Gene that from 1960 to 1968, Gene Patterson wrote a signed column for the Atlanta Constitution. He wrote the column every day for more than 8 years. He didn't write 2 on Thursday and 2 on Friday so he could have the weekend off. He wrote every single day more than 3,000 columns, and he kept them in a closet. And I persuaded him to give them to me, and I didn't give them back. And I sat in my room and I read them all, every single one of them. And I just want to refer to one that he wrote on September 13th, 1960. He wrote a column, about 500 words or so. He wrote it because a woman had written the newspaper a letter. She had been in a car wreck in Thomaston, Do I have that right? Thomaston, Georgia? And a police lieutenant had stopped to help her. The officer had been most courteous, wrote Mrs. Ann W. Smith, a high school math teacher of Bainbridge, Georgia. The officer had helped her. The officer who helped her, Lieutenant W.D. McDaniel, was 9 years on the force, and he said to Jean, "If people are courteous to me, I'm going to be courteous to them." The lieutenant was white. The school teacher was black. Gene Patterson thought it was his job to show Southerners, black and white, at their best when he could. With sympathy for the Southern cause, Gene persuaded his white kinfolk that they must change and that the sky would not fall if they did. And can you imagine a time, I would have been 12 years old in 1960, when a single act of courtesy by a white police officer toward a black woman would be considered newsworthy. As we try to heal the wounds of our time, race, politics, let's not forget to look back upon a past when the culture was even more poisonous. This is why the Poynter Institute has worked so hard for the last 2 years to move the Patterson Papers from St. Pete, Florida to Emory University in Atlanta. Let students and teachers, scholars and journalists immerse themselves in the work of a man whose physical and moral courage and whose brilliant writing can still light a lamp for the nation. Thank you very much.